The Morrigan is the newest god in Smite. Unlike many others, this god has been a point of much debate, and this video will go into that a little bit. More specifically, the question we will talk about is Morrigan good or bad design? The opinions on this split from one end to the other. There are people who absolutely hate Morrigan in her current state, whereas others really love her. And this video will go over the cons as well as the pros of this character and come to a conclusion what was done right or wrong with Morrigan. For that, I will not only factor in the points I came up with myself, but also the points of some other people who have enjoyed or have not enjoyed her that much and the reasons for it. Let's begin with the cons. The first problem with Morrigan is the huge amount of bugs that this god has. This god literally has more bugs than any other god in Smite ever had, as far as I can recall, and that's due to the very complex nature of the ultimate and the interactions that the ultimate implies with other abilities being possibly used twice, passives being activated twice, and things like that. The glitches are still not completely cleaned up, and a big reason of the god coming out that way is probably that the release was pretty rushed. Morrigan was showcased at Hi-Res Expo, and they really wanted to get the hype going with her, maybe get some old players back, get some new players in, and it was good timing in terms of advertising the character. But at the same time, due to this set deadline, the character was probably not as refined as Hi-Res wanted her to be, but they still kinda had to release her at that point. In addition, the problems for Morrigan probably won't end once the bugs are fixed. Whenever a new god is released from now on, it will probably have to be taken in consideration for Morrigan as well and checked back if her ultimate works properly in combination with that new god. So basically, Hi-Res gave themselves a ton of work by allowing Morrigan to copy others' abilities and introducing that character in general. The second point is the delay on her one deadly aspects, which really makes her feel a little bit clunky and not really smooth. This is something many others have criticized. I'm mentioning this point so early because another point will play into this. Because of the way deadly aspects work, you basically summon your aspects first and then attack. You will have two delays within the ability, meaning you have the first summoning delay and then the delay before they actually attack, two animations as well. And that is quite a fair bit of wind up. And while you can prevent a little bit of that by just holding down your left mouse button while using the one, that also means that you have a worse time aiming. So it's a bit of a downside either way. The unique summoning mechanic is pretty cool because it means you can set yourself up with that one and you can summon it in stealth and then hit it later on, but it also means that she feels fairly clunky. And that brings us to point number 3, which is the lack of synergy in her kit, or the partial synergy that exists. Due to the delay on the one, it would be most natural to use the one first when engaging. Go in with stealth and then use the one on the target, follow it up with the 2 and deal damage with some basics. This was how her kit was originally designed as well. If you look at the first versions of the PTS, her 2 could be procced by her passive, so Dark Omen could be procced by Doomsayer. That meant that when you hit your 2, you would just have to hit 2 more basic attacks after, because one would come right with the ability, and you would be able to proc the passive or the secondary damage effect of the 2 via your passive. This was removed on live, and it was limited to proccing it with her other damaging abilities or damage from her allies, which means that you effectively can't use the 1-2 combo as good as you should be able to. At the same time, if you were to use the 2-1 combo, that would mean that you would have to fight with a large amount of delay. You would proc the 2 on the target, but that would give them plenty of time to pop their escapes, get out of that situation before you can even use their 1 because of the long delay. I think this is very, very counterintuitive to how the character is designed in general, and I wish that would be changed simply because it really doesn't make much sense the way it is right now, and it was originally logical. It was just removed to give her a little less power, I would assume. At the same time, her abilities reset her basic attack chain, which is normal for any god in the game really, but in her case it's especially unfortunate because it means that you're gonna proc the passive much less often than you would like to in a normal fight, and that's because the passive is on the third hit of the chain. If it was on the second hit, for example, this would already be a lot easier. The fourth point is that Morrigan is extremely hard to balance. This is down to the fact that whenever a new god comes out, her balance has to be reconsidered. Additionally, Hyris has to be very careful not to give her too much damage in her own kit, but still make her own kit viable enough to not only rely on the ultimate, which is kinda hard to, well, bridge simply because of the fact that she will have more abilities than other gods in most situations. Point number 5 is that even now she still shares audio files for her one with Nox. I feel like this is something that could have just been fixed by giving her own audio files. You can hear it here. It is pretty much the same audio file between proccing her 2 with her 1 or in Nox's case dashing into someone and then jumping out of them again. The next point comes from some others, being that her playstyle is generally pretty risky and as such feels unrewarding. She's very squishy, but she really needs to get into the enemy's face. At the same time, most other gods like assassins that have to do the same thing have much better means of escaping or at least temporarily getting out of the fight, like for example an Naja ultimate. She can obviously compensate for that via her ultimate, but it won't always work, and it can be really frustrating when you engage and basically get shut down right away because you can't even turn into a tanky character in time. The last point concerns some interactions with her stealth and decoy. Number 1, the decoy doesn't actually take over buffs from your model, and it also doesn't take over the walking animation. The walking animation will always be the out of combat walking animation for the decoy, which means it is kinda easier to spot for people who already know about that. And that makes it a lot easier to counter than the ability should be, really. The second point of this is that her stealth doesn't de-aggro minions like Izanami's stealth does. When you use her stealth in the middle of a minion wave and you have minion aggro, then you're always revealed right away, and that's kinda unfortunate. These are quite a few negative points. Now let's go over to the pro side and look at what it's good about her. First of all, she has the most unique kit in Smite. She obviously has most abilities, basically because of the fact that she can take anyone else's abilities. But also overall, her kit is something that has many interactions that haven't been done that way before. And that is something that I think is very good. It really makes the game more interesting, having these complex characters that kind of work in their own, well, league pretty much. And I think it's a good point about the game that we have such characters, and Morrigan really stands out in that regard. Especially because for the longest time, a lot of characters in Smite have been more towards the plain and simple side. The second point is that she is clearly the hardest character in the game and basically impossible to master. This is not necessarily because of her own kit, but simply because if you want to play Morrigan the best possible, then you have to be perfect at every god. Now, she doesn't have the highest skill floor. There are definitely gods that are harder to learn than Morrigan, but the highest skill ceiling will forever be hers because she basically includes any other god's skill ceiling in her own skill ceiling, as weird as that sounds. And it's interesting to have more complicated, hard characters because they keep you working and grinding towards a goal. They keep you trying to improve on the game more and more, maybe encourage you to even learn other characters so you can play the Morrigan better in the end, and I think that's a good thing to have. The third point is a little more personal opinion. Despite of me criticizing the fact that she shares audio with Nox, basically, I still think she overall has great visuals and great audio. Her god design is really cool. It is something that we kind of have seen before. It's not completely out of the art style of Hyris that we've seen, but it still has its own unique flair as the first Celtic god. She has a really cool skin already that fulfills the theme even more. She has a really cool voice pack, and overall the abilities sound and feel very satisfying when you land them. Number 4 is the balance. Considering how extremely hard Morrigan is to balance, I would say that at this point, despite of being released relatively recently, she is mostly balanced. Now obviously a character like this will not have perfect balance in such an early stage, and she probably is towards the stronger side overall, and she could easily be in the higher tiers for players that can play her well. But she is not completely outright broken and destroying everyone, which is how she sounded like when we first heard about her ultimate and how she works in that regard. Countering is very much possible, especially with hard CC. Locking her down before she can even turn into somebody else will force her out relatively quickly. And as such, I think that is a good start for such a god. Despite of the fact that she's glitched out in many ways, and maybe when all those glitches are fixed, then she will need nerfs. That's something to, well, see forward to in the future, but as of now, it's unlikely for a Morrigan to completely destroy your whole team on her own unless she's severely fed. The fifth and last point on the side of the pros is her special interactions with her own kid, for example the decoy. She has some really interesting interactions via the decoy, allowing you to, for example, block Neath ultimates, Nemesis ultimates, or Kwang ultimates, or just fool a Thanatos into ulting your decoy via the indication of the threshold. So there are some really cool things you can do with that, and just playing around with the decoy, baiting abilities out by sending the decoy into lane or going into lane yourself and acting like you are the decoy really makes for some cool plays. It makes her escape harder to use because she doesn't have the typical jump out of the team fight and be safe, but at the same time it also makes her more interesting to use without breaking her at the same time. And with that, we come into the conclusion. I personally think that Morrigan is a great character. She is very fun to play. She feels satisfying to play once you get used to her kit, but at the same time she has a lot of problems. A lot of these problems can be worked out over time. A lot of these problems exist because of the way the character is designed, but especially in regards to synergy, a lot should be done about her kit in order to make her feel even more satisfying and more approachable, especially for those who are not familiar with all other gods. I think Morrigan has great potential, and I think it's a good, refreshing thing to see a god like that in Smite, just to shake up the meta a little bit and also maybe encourage fixing on some of the older gods' glitched abilities now that she's in the game, so that's another additional benefit. It would have probably been nicer to see her being released a little later when a little more of the bugs are ironed out already, but as it stands, that's just simply how it had to go with Hi-Res Expo, so that's understandable as well. While I do think that Morrigan is great overall and she's good for the game, I think that criticism in regards to how she was released and how many of the things still interact is more than appropriate and more than needed, especially when it comes to feedback on the glitches that still exist in order to get those removed. And that's my conclusion. Let me know how you feel about Morrigan in the comments down below. Thank you guys for watching. Hope to see you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth out.